Silver has been the best performing commodity of 2016, and in appreciation of our listeners, Palisade Radio and Palisade Research are giving away a free American Eagle 1-ounce silver round each and every week for the rest of the year. Just visit palisaderadio.com and enter your email for a chance to win. Welcome back to another episode of Palisade Radio. This is your host, Colin Cattell. Returning on the program with me today is my good friend and best-selling author, as well as philosopher and investor, Doug Casey. Doug, thanks for coming back on the show today.
Well, it's a pleasure, Colin. I understand you're in Barcelona at the moment. I'm in Aspen on my way to Argentina next week.
Yeah, well, that's right. Well, Doug, you've visited, I believe, about 100 countries, and I'm far behind, so I'm doing my best to catch up.
I think I'm up to 155 at the moment, but who's keeping track?
Well, plenty to discuss since our last conversation, most exciting being your very first novel, which was released just a couple weeks ago. Before I get into that, I want to mention that Doug is a neighbor of mine at a community called La Estancia de Cafayate, which is a golf and polo resort down in Argentina that Doug dreamed up several years ago and has now come to fruition. There will be an event there for homeowners and those interested in potentially joining the community or even just coming down for a weekend of networking. That's the first week of November. You can just go to lec.com.ar for details. I'll be down there as well. Also, this week's winner of our 1-ounce American Eagle silver coin giveaway is Brad from Calgary. Just remember to visit palisaderadio.com and input your email to receive a free report on silver investing. One lucky person each week will receive an ounce of silver in the mail. Now, on the topic at hand, Doug, congrats on the first of 6 or 7 novels in the High Ground series you're going to be putting out. Your book is called Speculator High Ground. It's already become an Amazon bestseller from what I saw, and I've had the pleasure of giving it a read-through. Traditionally, Doug, you've been a very successful nonfiction writer, and I've heard you say that you wanted to write fiction because it allows you to say more than you can otherwise say. From a macro perspective, walk our listeners through your idea for the overall series, not just focused on the one book.
Well, what we're doing is we're following our hero, Charles Knight, starting at age 23 as he progresses through 6 unjustly besmirched and highly politically incorrect occupations, and we reform the reputations of these occupations as Charles engages in them. First is speculator. Everybody hates speculators because they capitalize on financial disasters, and Charles does. He takes initially $10,000 and turns it into a gigantic fortune. So that's the first book, and it's about a revolution in Africa, and there's a lot about the mining business and so forth. So the book is quite educational. And incidentally, our hero, Charles, never goes to college. He considers that a misallocation of his time and money. So we talk about that. And the next book, he becomes a drug lord because the government steals, well, I'm not trying to give away the plot, but they steal most of the money that he made. And he gets into the drug business, and drug lord explains the drug business, both the techniques of it and the effects of it and the morality of it. And the third novel, where Charles is getting a little bit pissed off at this point, is Assassin, where he becomes a professional assassin because he figures there are just some people that need killing. So it talks about the history of assassination, the techniques, the morality of it. Then the next novel, he ramps it up further and becomes a terrorist, but a terrorist that doesn't believe in collateral damage. So we talk about terrorism as a method of warfare, including the morality of it and the techniques of it and so forth. That book will be quite instructive. Then he becomes a warlord as he goes back to Africa as they're hunting him. And here I explain basically what my hobby has been for many years, going to backward third world countries and trying to reform their economies, turn them into Singapore on steroids, which is what Charles does in the book. And the 6th novel, of course, is the most incorrect of all, Antichrist, where the natives in the country in Africa where he has Gondwana, which people will become familiar with in Speculator, this first book, and it's he invents a new religion, and it's kind of a debunking of Christianity and Islam especially. So there we have it. That's the series of novels. But start with Speculator.
Yeah, let's start with Speculator, and I oftentimes find that fiction can be more instructive than nonfiction, and I think that can be argued in the case of your new book, Speculator. Through the eyes of our protagonist, Charles Knight, as you pointed out, we're led through the story of adventure in Africa surrounding what's a very large gold discovery, and Charles, being a young man already on his way to riches, travels to the site and starts to question some things he's seeing. I won't give away any more than that, but what transpires is a riveting story with violence and romance and intrigue. And as I was reading this book, Doug, I was thinking that there are certain parallels between the life of our protagonist, Charles Knight, and the younger version of Doug Casey. How much of this book would you say is based around your own life?
Well, Colin, they say, and I think it's correct, that everybody's first novel is autobiographical, and this one is to a reasonable degree. So I'm able to say a lot of things here that I've never said elsewhere because it's fiction, supposedly. But you're quite correct, actually.
Okay, and I think that the book is a fantastic lesson for those unfamiliar with the junior mining speculation game, but for myself, I find it extremely interesting. For those who are experienced in the space, I can't think of very many books, especially novels, that revolve around junior mining speculation. In fact, most people don't even know that it exists. Doug, what's...
No, they don't. It's amazing. What are there, 2,000 mining stocks out there, and most people don't even know they exist as a class, which is odd because they're the most volatile class of stocks in the world, more volatile than tech stocks, for instance.
Yeah, that's true. And Doug, you've spent much of your life in the mining space, and a lot of the fortune that you've made has come through different companies that you've helped fund and invest in the resource space. I feel that the book gives a little bit of a negative spin to the resource speculation game. There's, obviously the bad that comes with the good in the business.
Well, yes, that's true, because of the couple thousand so-called mining companies out there, really only about 5 or maybe 10% of them even have a right to exist. They have gold, perhaps, on the share certificates they issue, but very, very, very few of them have any gold in the ground. There's entirely too much promotion and too much hype to do with the junior mining area. But that's one of the reasons why it's as volatile as it is. I don't like mining as a business, incidentally. And of course, Charles, in the book, discovers a lot about the mining business. But it's a 19th century choo-choo train business, very hard to make money in as a business. The real money in mining is made in the stocks. And it's too bad, because during the 19th century, there used to be this expression, hey, it's like having a gold mine, which implied wonderful asset, you're going to make a lot of money. But very, very few gold mines in the world today are even breaking even. So the game has changed over time. And I think that in the next 20 years, most mining companies are going to be dead ducks because the technology is going to change so much. But the good news is that the principles of speculation that I discuss in Speculator, they'll remain the same, even if the industry changes and mining changes and so forth.
Well, Doug, knowing you as I do, I find this book to be so patently Doug Casey. If you've read Doug's past writings, which of course is nonfiction, then you know that Charles Knight and the teachings in this book outline a lot of themes that you talk about. Obviously that's the whole idea of this set of novels. Can you touch on a couple of the themes beyond what you've already talked about that readers might find in this particular book?
Well, one thing, and this is especially relevant to younger people under 40, is that do what Charles did. And instead of wasting, or let's say misallocating lots of time and money going to college, Charles uses his time and money to learn things in the real world. And let me give the listeners a piece of advice that I think is very important if they follow this. It's that if you're looking for opportunity in the world today, you've got to go someplace where you're not on a level playing field. In other words, every year there's millions of young Americans and Canadians that get out of school and they've got the same background, the same education, the same attitudes, the same everything, and you're competing against millions of other people in the same age cohort. That doesn't make any sense. What you ought to do is get on a plane and go to the continent of Africa, 50 countries there, and you'll find that your knowledge and experience and everything else is unlike what they have there. And it's possible in Africa to spend 2 weeks in a country and be sitting down with the president at the end of that time, just as an outsider. So if you're interested in not just adventure, but making money, Africa is the place to go because nobody goes there. You'll have no competition. So that's one of the themes that is in the book. And I wish that I'd done it earlier than I did in life, quite frankly. I'll tell you a story. When I was, how old was I? I was about 23. And I met a guy in Washington, D.C. named Yehuda Ben Yehuda. And at that time, he told me, Mr. Casey, after we, spent some time, it was nice of him to call me Mr. Casey when I was only 23 and he was about 60. He said, if you go to the Gold Coast, which is now Ghana, and you spend 5 years there, I promise you at the end of that time, you'll have 5% of everything going into the country and 5% of everything going out of it. Well, I should have followed his advice. I did later, and not to that degree, didn't spend that amount of time in any one country, et cetera, et cetera. But I hope that some of your listeners follow Yehuda's advice, which is my advice at this point. So that's one theme that I want to make, that you got to go where nobody else goes. That's where the opportunities are. And don't clutter your mind up and spend lots of money and indebt yourself sitting in a classroom listening to some professor of questionable credentials and questionable philosophical orientation yap at you, because a year later you may remember nothing from the class simply because half the time you cut the class to start with, and then you may fall asleep in the class, and if you take notes, you may not be able to read your notes later. It's not the way to get an education going to college. So those are two of the themes in the book.
Well, I'm certainly not ending the interview here, but I would love to at some point dive into a more in-depth discussion of your life, Doug. And for listeners who want to hear some of that, I just heard a great interview you did with James Altucher just last week. You can just go ahead and Google Doug Casey, James Altucher, and it's about an hour-long interview where Doug dives into a lot of the stories from his past. And if you read the book, you can certainly find some parallels between the novel and some of the stories that Doug has experienced in his life. You know, Doug, there's even geology lessons in this book, and like I said before, for people who aren't familiar with the mining space, this provides a fun education on a sector that is really quite compelling and interesting, and a lot of people don't know about. And
well, you're right, Colin, because one of the it's really kind of boring reading a geology textbook, but if you're going to learn to speculate in mining stocks, you really have to know some geology. So this book is kind of like a very sugar-coated, spoon-fed crash course in geology, which is actually an interesting aspect of the book. And I got to say one other thing, too. A lot of people have compared Speculator to Ayn Rand's novels. But one thing we don't have in this book is a 100-page long speech, which John Galt gives.
Yeah, well,
I hope it lasts. Go ahead.
I was just saying I certainly found quite a few similarities between your writing and Ayn Rand's, both The Fountainhead and Atlas Shrugged, of course. I've always found The Fountainhead to be a better, more concise book with many of the same points. And like you said, it doesn't have a 100-page speech that John Galt gives in there.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think The Fountainhead is actually a better and more interesting story. Quite correct. And interestingly also, Rand is famous as a novelist, but my favorite books by her are her nonfiction books, in particular one called The Virtue of Selfishness, which summarizes her view on the world. I remember when I first read that book, I had to put it down after the first page because I was in shock that somebody had crystallized all the thoughts that had been in my mind for years but were inchoate. So actually, fiction is a different market with different readers than nonfiction. They're both equally good, equally valid, but it's interesting, I find.
Agreed. And The Virtue of Selfishness is one of my favorite books. I've read probably 7 or 8 of Ayn Rand's nonfiction works, and they're all very well thought through. Doug, before the interview we were talking, and since I'm going to be seeing you in a couple weeks, we had discussed signing a couple copies of your book and giving them away to our listeners. So I'll pick those up from you when I see you. If you want to be added into that so that you can get one of Doug's free books, just go to PalisadeRadio.com, and at the very top, anytime in the next 7 days, after we release this, just input your email, and then we'll draw from those people, and you might end up winning a free copy of Doug's book, The Speculator. Doug, since I have you on the line, and things are getting very interesting in the resource space again, I want to start out by asking you, are you still doing a lot of speculating in the mining space? It seems like we're coming back into the next bull market, and it's hard to get away from a business. It's so much fun when it works.
Absolutely, and I think that after the huge bear market that started in 2011 and only ended in January of this year, these stocks, now they've had a good bounce off the bottom since January, but now's a very good time to get into these things. I think we're going to have I think there's going to be a bubble in gold before this is over, and I think there could be a super bubble in these tiny little mining exploration stocks. So yes, the answer is yes. I'm taking large positions in some companies, and I generally do it in the form of a private placement, where you can buy the stock at a discount to the market and get a warrant. And sometimes today, these companies are so desperate, the market's been so bad, for the first time you're seeing 5-year detachable warrants on some of these things. So I think this is a very good time to be speculating in these mining stocks. I think, I don't have to tell you this, but there have been many times over the past 5, 6, that classifies as many in this context, where the market as a whole for these stocks has moved up 10 to 1, with individual stocks moving up 100 to 1 or more. And I think this could happen again. I think we're in one of those markets at the beginning of it. Most people are still completely oblivious to what's going on.
Doug, the mining business is fraught with a lot of problems, and you've been in the mining business for decades. Have you given much thought to why the junior mining business is the way it is? And what I mean by that is people talk about trying to reform the business. The exchange constantly puts in new measures to prevent money being spent on certain things or regulations on reports such as 43101s. People say there's too much promotion, there's too many scumbags, too many incompetent management teams. Why does this business attract so many problems like this? I guess in any volatile business where you can go from rags to riches so quickly, it's going to attract that kind of people.
Well, because you really can't tell what's 1 inch under the ground. That's why Mark Twain said 100 years ago, a gold mine is a hole in the ground with a liar at the entrance, because nobody really knows what's down there. And even if you get lucky on a drill hole and you get what looks like a good result, you don't know what the size of it is. You don't know what your costs are going to be. You don't know what the recovery is going to be. There's so many variables. And it's not like manufacturing where you can see a factory, assess it, see how many widgets it's turning out, what the demand is for it. Mining is just a horrible business, and it draws a lot of the wrong kind of people. But in the future, I think that mining is going to become very high tech, and most mining operations today are going to be dinosaurs. I think that mining is going to move to the asteroid belt, which is full of heavy metals. I think that when fusion power eventually becomes economic, it's going to allow the transmutation of metals economically. We can transmute them now, but not economically. I think biotech is going to allow the processing of seawater in the process of desalination and retrieving massive amounts of all of the 92 natural elements, which are all dissolved in seawater. So all of these things are going to happen. Even nanotechnology is going to make almost anything viable or deposit. So, running around with big yellow trucks playing in the dirt, I don't think we're going to be doing that in another generation.
Interesting perspective. I want to end with kind of a fun question that's been beaten to death for the last year pertaining to the upcoming and seemingly not very important elections going on in the U.S. We, of course, have Trump as the outsider who seems to blown himself up here in the last couple weeks as far as the polls can tell, up against Hillary Clinton, as corrupt as they come. Doug, what do you think that both these candidates spell for what's coming out in the U.S.?
Well, to me, it shows how degraded the whole political system and process is in the U.S. That, Hillary might win this election. In fact, they say she will. Of course, I don't trust the polls because the polls are run by exactly the same kind of beltway insiders that viscerally hate Trump, and I mean hate him. This isn't like a typical election where, you can say, well, I like this guy or I like that guy, although anybody that runs for political office is generally has a criminal mentality. But I certainly hope Trump wins because we need somebody to break the rice bowls of the deep state at this point. And it's amazing to me. We almost had a choice between Hillary, the Clinton clan, the dynasty, and what's that Bush, Jeb Bush, who would have been the third Bush. I mean, what is this, like choosing between the Tudors and the Stuarts or something like that in England? It's dynasties. The whole thing, I still think that Trump's going to win. I don't have my finger on the pulse of the hoi polloi in the U.S., but I think the average guy is so fed up that he's going to vote for Trump, even if he's not admitting it. And I think a lot of the people that were going to vote for Bernie realize that Hillary stole the Democratic nomination from them, and they're not going to vote for her. I think they're either not going to vote or they're going to vote for Trump. as a giving a finger to the establishment. So it ain't over till it's over. That's the way I feel.
All right, well, Doug Casey's The Speculator, Volume 1 of the High Ground series is now out. In the newsletter here, we're going to provide a link to Amazon.com so you can buy either the e-reader version or have a paperback book sent to you. Doug, thanks so much for coming back on the program. Once again, for our listeners, just type your email in at the top of PalisadeRadio.com, and we're going to send out a few copies of Doug's book, The Speculator, signed by Doug. We'll do that in the next couple weeks here. Doug, thanks so much for being back on the program.
Well, it was my pleasure, Colin. Thank you.
Think you understand the junior mining sector, and you think that the participants in the mining sector, junior mining sector, are good people and kind people, hit the bid.
And the world is always going to need raw materials. It's going to need copper and gold and nickel and so forth.
Totally destabilized. Hey, Troll, did you hear what's going on in Yemen, or are you too stupid?